Hello, you're watching the nested if statement tutorial. This will work with Excel 2003, 2007, 2010. I'm using Excel 2010 here. The nested if statement is just a fancy way of saying one if statement within another if statement, but it enables you to have a lot more flexibility with your if statements. And so by trial and error, I've found that you can only use up to 8 nested if statements, but generally you're only going to want to use 1 or 2. So what's a nested if statement all about? Well, the if statement essentially asks a yes or no question. So using this data set, it might be something like, where does where are our sales over $20,000? Which row are our sales over $20,000? A nested if statement would be able to say, um, which rows are February and over $20,000. And so that's what we're actually going to look at today. And you can use your imagination on how helpful it could be in the long run in terms of different usages and uses that you can implement nested if statements with. So again, I'm going to say February sales over 20,000. And so we'll start with our equal sign in our if statement, and we'll open parentheses, and you'll see the syntax here that you're probably familiar with, but it's logical test, value if true, and value if false, which is really another way of saying what do you want to test, what do you want Excel to say if that test turns out to be true, and what do you want Excel to say if that test turns out to be false. So they're all separated by commas, like all Excel syntax and arguments. And so we'll start from here. And so our logical test is, again, we want to see February sales over 20,000. So we're going to essentially work backwards and say, we're going to check and see if our sales column is greater than 20,000. Then we're going to put a comma, and you'll see it moves over to our value if true part of the function. And instead of putting in a yes or a no here or some other field, we're going to actually start another if statement. So we don't put the equal sign again, we just put the if characters. And we'll open parentheses. You'll see that it changed from a blue to a green color to indicate that it's a second if statement. So we'll open parentheses, and we're looking for February sales. So keep this in mind. The if syntax, like you can see here, is test, value if true, and value if false. So we've already filled out our logical test for our first if statement, and now we're working on our value if true if statement. So this entire if statement that I'm about to do is all for the value if true. And so we're going to say for the month column, is that equal to February? And then again, value if true, we'll put yes, and value if false, we'll put no. Then we close our parentheses, and when we hit comma, we'll move over to the value if false part of the function. So you can see that this C2 greater than 20,000, that's our first logical test. Then in our value if true argument, we've got our second, or our nested if statement, where we say, does this cell equal February? If it does equal February, let's put yes. If it doesn't, let's put no. And then finally, we're at our value if false part of the function, and we'll just put no. So when we hit enter, this should say no. And as we go over here to the bottom right part of the cell and drag down, what it's going to do is automatically populate each of these. And so I'm gonna populate all the Januaries first, and they should all say no, because none of them have February. And then I'm going to drag down, and we'll see what happens in February. So you can see that for the items that were over 20,000, this said yes. And really, it's a straightforward proposition in terms of how to implement the function. If you kind of take a step back and think about it, it's not too bad. Really, you're just replacing the value if true or value if false part of the original if function with its own if statement. And so it's actually quite a powerful tool. Obviously, when you only have 10 lines, you could just look down the list and answer that question. But using if statement and especially nested if statements, it ends up being a lot more scalable. So let's say if you had 1,000 lines or 1,000,000 lines, it would be a lot more of a scalable type function. So I hope this was helpful for you. If it was, just feel free to leave a comment in the comment section and give me a like. And thanks a lot.